God, you're our refuge and strength, a very present help in time of need. Therefore our hearts will not fear, though the world all around us should shake.
At any rate, as we open our Bibles to John chapter 4, and we look at this next dialogue between Jesus, one of the one-on-ones that he has, as I look ahead to this, I really do look forward to it. It's something that I hope to see afresh. I'm in no hurry as we've been going through the Bible and taking the time to look at it. And in chapter 3, this was set purposely side by side, because there in chapter 3 we saw this guy Nicodemus, who's the fairest of the Pharisees. He's somebody who, as far as what the law of Moses, what the Torah could produce, Nicodemus would have been the best. And Nicodemus comes to Jesus by night, but now Jesus goes to someone else by day. And it's the other end of the spectrum. It's if Nicodemus is on the right, if Nicodemus is a really righteous, right reverend rabbi, this woman is so far on the left that it takes a really, really liberal Jew like Jesus to love her and to go and greet her. And so between this guy on the right and her on the left, the heart of God is there in the middle. And if you want to know how much he loves you, you look to the cross, you look to these stories. How much does he love you? How broad, how wonderful is his love? What a picture God has given us here. It says in chapter 4, verse 1, that when therefore the Lord knew that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus was making and baptizing more disciples than John, although Jesus himself was not baptizing, but his disciples were, he left the area. He left Judea and departed once again back into Galilee. So we saw at the end of chapter 3 that stuff starts brewing in people's hearts. Even good people like the followers of John the Baptist, jealousy, rivalry, envy, false loyalty, all these things start to get stirred up around religious things. It typically, people can be prideful and all worked up over politics, over sports, but when you get to religion, people really can get weird. And we saw how John the Baptist, when his disciples brought the whole thing to him, he just nailed it with a few facts, the things that we looked at. In the case of Jesus, Jesus just leaves. He leaves the area. Eventually, religious controversy and quarreling, it will culminate at the cross, but he's not there yet. And so he just sets a good example of what Paul said to Timothy and Titus to do. You walk away from some of this stuff. You don't get embroiled in it. God is everywhere, of course. In him we live and move and have our being. He's omnipresent, and yet, in a sense, he moves most fully wherever he's most welcomed, wherever he's most wanted. We see that in the person of Jesus. And so in this case, it's back to Galilee. There in Judea, there's all this controversy going on. So he leaves that area. And it says, verse 4, that he had to pass through Samaria. Now, that had to pass through Samaria. It was the shortest route. It wasn't easy. None of the traveling then was easy. But typically when pilgrims went from Galilee to Jerusalem, as they were told to do, we're told that was a common route, but only common for common people. Really religious people, certainly people like the Pharisees, someone like Nicodemus, they never went through Samaria. I don't know that Nicodemus ever would have taken the route that Jesus took. It says he had to go through Samaria, but again, while that might have been the shortest route, those who prided themselves in their religious sanctity and their holiness, those who really thought they were serving God, they thought they were really doing what God wanted. They prided themselves in going the extra mile, but not the extra mile like Jesus taught us about. They went the extra mile to get away from people who might in some way mess me up. They might in some way ruin my vibe between me and God. I don't want those kind of people in my life. And so while religious folks would go around, they'd go the extra miles to avoid it, Jesus had to go through because he's Jesus. He has to be himself. He has to be genuine. He has to be authentic. He's not going to be the Pharisee. And like he says later, I do always those things that please the Father. He had to go through Samaria because that's the very sort of thing that would please our Heavenly Father. And he had to go through Samaria because I believe he had to meet this woman. I believe that what takes place here is far from chance encounter. I believe it's an appointment that she wouldn't have known of. Jesus, I don't know. I mean, I can't even begin to imagine what it would be like to be Jesus. I try to be Christ-like, but I'm not Christ. And in many ways, though he was God in human flesh, he limited himself. He talks about how certain things that he just didn't know because that wasn't where he was at the time. Walking in human flesh, I don't know that he knew all the while, there's this woman, I've got this appointment. I don't know if he was checking his Google Calendar or looking on there, but there was something inside of him. It was who he is. It's God's love working inside of him that he wore himself out. He wearied himself to get there at a certain time, at a certain place, because this is the appointment of love. This is the heart of God demonstrated here. And so when it says that he had to pass through Samaria, that's the way I've always seen it. That's the way I've always read it. I believe that's true. He just had to. That's how he loves. And it says, verse 5, that he came to a city of Samaria called Sychar, near the parcel of ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. So this was once Holy Land. A holy land where now those who were the holy Jews would try to avoid. But these parcels of land were the holiest of the Holy Land. These were places that at one time God had met with man in the highest degree, and the Samaritans still saw it that way. To them, it still was the Holy Land. And that's why they didn't want to leave. But to the religious Jews, it was a place to avoid. They saw this land had been defiled by all of the false customs and false doctrines and all the things that the Samaritans did that the Jews didn't approve of. And so they would try to avoid this place. But the place where Jesus meets with this woman is the place where God first met with Abraham when he left his homeland off in Ur of the Chaldees and eventually sojourned into the land that God said, I'll show you when you get there. He came to this place, Shechem, and in that place, Genesis chapter 12 tells you the story. God met with Abraham and gave him the promise about the land and the seed and the blessing and how he would be a father in such an exalted sense. All of that first meeting, that first altar, when the first Hebrew crossed the river and entered into the land of the Canaanites, that was here in this place where Jesus meets with this woman. And there in that place, in the last chapter of Joshua, after the children of Israel enter the land once again, in that last chapter, in the same place, Joshua gathers all 12 tribes. And he says, here's what God has called you to do, and you're not going to do it. I know you're going to fail here. And he set up a stone that's basically, here's the stone that says you're going to fail. You're not going to live up to all that God called you to do. But it was there again at Shechem that was set up. And so Jesus now goes to that place, city of Samaria. They called it Sychar. Names change. It might be related to the way the Jews saw the Samaritans. Sychar is like a strong drink, like drunkenness. You get this picture about going to the well and getting water. The Jews thought maybe it's more like going to the pub and meeting a woman. It's just Sychar. It's just a place. It's not a holy land anymore. These aren't people who really love God. Now, if you talk to the people themselves, like Jesus talks to this woman, oh no, I really love God. Our people really love God. The controversies that were going on then, they're still going on now. And Jesus came to that place and met with that woman there, that ground that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. And it says that Jacob's well was there. And Jacob's Well still is there. You know, of all the places you can visit in the Holy Land, a certain percentage are bogus. You know, it doesn't take long to have, you know, your idealistic dreams kind of get punctured. It's business. It's selling stuff. It's tourism. It's all, you know. And Gary Simmons from the Central Valley Church, he's touring through Israel, first time touring through there right now. It's funny to see his pictures he sends back every day, the things he's learning, and it's just Jacob's Well. That's probably one of the more genuine places, because usually wherever a well is, they don't move over the course of time. There's a well there. There's not that many, and there is a place that there's a Greek Orthodox church that now covers it. And it's in primarily what was said to be Palestinian territory. It's in the West Bank, but this Greek Orthodox church covers the place. And it's funny, you can look, you know, you don't have to be a Bible scholar like me, which I'm not. You can get on TripAdvisor and just look up Jacob's Well. In Nablus is the region, as the Palestinians call it. And Jacob's Well, TripAdvisor will tell you all kinds of things to watch out for, all the kind of things that are cool. You go in there, I guess not many, because it's kind of scary for a lot of Westerners to go there. And you go there, and apparently it's usually it's not a tourist trap, at least as far as there's not a lot of tourists trapped, at least. There's not a lot of people there. You go, and there's some wily old priest that comes out and takes you to the well, and you can drop something down in there, and I guess it's like 130 feet deep. You wait, and splash, and then there's water that they can bring up. And one person on TripAdvisor said it's about $10 now if you want a bottle of water from Jacob's Well. But you can go to that place and visit it and see all that sort of stuff. And again, a lot of the controversies and crazy things that were happening then, they happen to this day. And for me, you know, aside from all the tourism and, you know, water's water, and this probably isn't always the purest stuff around anyway, but it's a picture. Even here, when Jesus meets with this woman, it's a picture of something so precious, so important, something that I hope each of you can capture, something that I believe was printed, that it would be imprinted on your heart. I think one of the most beautiful pictures in all the Bible is this one chapter here. And that it happens at the well is something that's been painted from Genesis forward. Because whenever you find a place of water, especially in a barren land, a dry land, when you find an oasis, when you find a spring, a well of water in a barren world, that's a picture of who our God is and what his love is and what the individual communion that he would want to have with each of us. And the first mention of a well or a spring in the Bible is in Genesis chapter 16. And it's a story that I just need to remind you of. Most of you know the story, but in the light of this woman, and I think most of you know Jesus meeting the Samaritan woman. I'm not going to read the whole story today. We'll look at it for a week or two. But you know what's going to happen, don't you? I hope. If you don't, read real fast. But in the light of what you already know, let me just remind you that in Genesis chapter 16, that's where that whole story plays out, where Abraham's been promised the big family, but hasn't even had one kid, and it looks like it's not going to work out. And his wife, Sarai, says, hey, you know, I've got a slave gal, Egyptian, Hagar. Why don't you go ahead and use her? Quite sadly, abuse her. Why don't you take advantage of her? She's a slave. Why don't you go ahead and use her as a concubine? Why don't we have a kid through her, a surrogate mother? She doesn't have a choice. She's a slave. And so Abraham goes along with this whole idea. Once he goes along with it, she gets ticked off. You know, it's amazing how dysfunctional the families are from the very beginning. And she's all upset, and she says, get rid of this woman. How dare you do what I told you to do? And Hagar goes out into the wilderness, and she's going to die out there. And it says there in Genesis 16 that the angel of the Lord found her. He found her. The good shepherd found her by a well in the wilderness. The first reference to a well, a spring in the wilderness. And as he talks with her, she realized this angel of the Lord was somehow the Lord himself. And she said, "You're the God who sees." As he promised that the child you had, you're an outcast right now, but in fact, your child and what's going to happen through you, there's going to be greatness that'll proceed. And he gave her great encouragement. And she said, "You're the God who sees." And then she named that well, the well of the living one who sees me. And as you know the story about this woman of Samaria, you see the parallels even there. That she says, you're the one here in a world where women are so abused. You're the one who would go out and encourage. You're the one who sees me. You're the one who knows. And then the next reference to a well in the Bible is in chapter 21 of Genesis. Same woman, Hagar. Years later, even though she went back, things didn't get that much better. When later Abraham and Sarah do have their own child, little Isaac is growing up, and now Isaac is the one. And Sarai again just says, "Hey, we got to get rid of this Hagar. We got to get rid of this Ishmael. They can't fit here anymore." And again, cast out into the wilderness. And in that scene, Genesis chapter 21, she figures she's going to die. She's out there in the wilderness. Abraham gave her a bottle of water. I don't know if he charged $10 for it, but gave her some water. And here, sends her and Ishmael out there, and the water ran out, and she lays down, doesn't want to see her son die, she thinks she's going to die, and again, God finds her, and he shows her a well that she wasn't aware of, shows her where she could get a drink of water, and again gives promise regarding your future, regarding your family. And so those stories of the God who sees and the God who opens the eyes of others to see that take place by a well. Again, this is not a chance circumstance. This is not just a one-off story here. This is a picture that's been painted from Genesis all the way through John. And it says here in verse 6 that Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, therefore, being wearied from his journey, was sitting thus by the well. And it was about the 6th hour. Now, it says that Jesus was worn out when he was wearied by his journey. That part captures my imagination. It captures my heart. It speaks volumes to me, though it may not yet say much to you. To me, the fact that Jesus, I figure if anyone was fit, it would have been Jesus. I don't know how often he went to the gym. He did a lot of walking. Just living in those days was a lot of work. But I figure he was probably as well in shape as anyone. And yet it says that he was wearied by the journey. Now his disciples, they went on the same journey, but they had enough energy to go to the grocery store, because it says that he sent them out to go to the city. Not because, you're the servants, I'm the one that's supposed to sit around. For some reason, Jesus was worn out, more so than anyone else, by the same walk, but it wasn't the same walk. In many ways, though he's the Son of Man, nothing's quite the same for him. He carries loads. He holds burdens that nobody sees, because love does that. And so here he is in this situation. And so when it says that he was wearied by the journey, not wearied of the journey, not like I don't want to do this, but wearied because of the journey, to me it's just one of those little phrases like in the story of the prodigal son. And it says the father ran to meet him. Just those words speak so much to my heart. Here's Jesus, worn out, sitting down. It's a picture of the good shepherd who would do whatever it takes to find that lost lamb, to find that isolated sheep, that ewe that's out there in the desert. And so here he is, and it's noon. The 6th hour in Roman time would have been noon, and clearly that's the time when water would be needed the most. If ever you needed a bottle of water, it would be high noon in the desert. But it was the time of day when people would go to get it the least, because it's high noon in the desert. You either get the water early in the morning or you get it late in the evening, but you don't go out there at noon. Again, the next reference to a well in Genesis chapter 24 is when later on Isaac needs a wife. And where are you going to get a wife? Well, Abraham is bothered because he says, God told me that my son isn't supposed to have a wife from among the Canaanites, and that's where I live. Where are we going to find a girl? This is before any dating websites were around. And so he sent his servant, Abimelech. He says, go back to my hometown. Go back to, which seems kind of strange, but go back to the heathen lands that I came from. And so when the servant goes there, we're told, and I don't think this is all just like, oh yeah, by chance. I think it's all by design. It's like puzzle pieces that fit together. We're told in Genesis 24 that the servant went to the well in the evening, because it says in the evening, that's when all the women came out to draw water. So this guy wants to find a girl. That's where the girls are. They're all at the well. And they're all at the well in the evening. There are jokes I could make, but I'm not going to make those jokes. But he goes there, and that's where he finds Rebecca, this girl. Let me give you water and all your camels too. You can't find that kind online. But the Lord found her. And it's funny, all the different ideas that we have about women that are so different than biblical days, and thank God for that. The biblical days were pretty harsh. But Jesus was always way ahead of his time because he's timeless. The way he treats women, even back in the days of Hagar, certainly up through this woman of Samaria, we get a glimpse of the direction we ought all to be going in. But it was in the evening time when, as a social thing, the women would go out together and they would get the water. So when this woman comes here at noon, something's up. And most of you, knowing this story, have already assumed some of the same things that I'm going to assume. We might all be wrong, but I'm going to assume those things. I'm going to assume certain things about her life, that she's isolated, that she's somebody that probably doesn't have a whole lot of people in her life that love her. And here she is at a time when you wouldn't expect anyone to be there, but this is the time when Jesus knew she would be there. And Jesus wearies himself to meet her there at noon, because that's when the water would be needed the most. And it says, verse 7, no surprise to Jesus, there came a woman of Samaria to draw water. And Jesus said to her, give me a drink. So here's this woman who comes out. Normally the women would make it a social thing. Look, you got to go get water anyway. You got to go to Costco and Trader Joe's, and why don't you go with a friend, save some camel fuel. It was a social thing. The fact that she comes there all alone at noontime, I don't think it's a huge stretch to say she's socially isolated. And it may have been mutual. It may have been that all the women thought, man, we don't want to be with her. We'll see that Jesus talks about how many husbands she's had and the guy she's living with then. And, there was some way in which, in terms of relationships, she had probably been damaged in a lot of ways over her lifetime. And it may have been mutual. The other women said, we don't want to be with her. And she may have said, I don't want to be with you. People like you, who cares? I don't want to be with people like you. But one way or the other, she's not alone because Jesus is there. And he wearied himself to make sure that he would be there. And she comes along at noon, and he says, give to me a drink. Now, again, I'm guessing, but I don't think I'm too far off to see in this not a demand, but an invitation. Just as it was with Jesus there at the wedding feast of Cana, when his mom was making a suggestion, and he says, woman, what between you and me? Not a rude thing, a loving thing. We looked at that then. In the same way, I don't think he's just saying, hey, give me a drink, woman. You're a servant. That's what you're designed for. Give me a drink. This is one of the many DVDs I expect to watch when I get to heaven. To look back and see it, I'm convinced that what I'll see, the way in which he phrases it, it's inviting. It's saying, I want to interact with you. And doing it in the most natural way that one would do it there at a well. He says, give to me a drink. And I think in all of that, I've always viewed this as a lesson in cross-cultural ministry, or just crossing any place where you want to build a bridge, you want to develop a friendship. Friendship goes both ways. And too often, the historical approach toward missions or cross-cultural stuff is to come as the great blesser. We got all the religious gifts and goodies and all the answers, and now, folks, aren't you glad we're here? Now we'll make you in our own image and likeness. Too often, stuff like that has happened. It's so different from the way Jesus deals with people. In fact, I find that throughout what we do versus what he does. And he comes in a way in which he says, look, you can do something for me. You have things that I would like. You have gifts, you have abilities, you have something that I myself would need. And whenever we want bridges built, when you come with arrogance and when you come with the one who, I've got it all, is it any surprise that even if you build a bridge, it's not a real relationship, it's more of building a monopoly. It's more another form of making people dependent upon our system, the stuff that we can dole out. But if you want real openness from others, it helps to be open yourself. If you want to have a real relationship, present yourself as a real person. And you know what? You're a real person too. And you can give me something. And I would like to receive something from you. And then maybe I can give you something as well. But it's an exchange. It's that sort of openness it's Jesus. I wish we were more like him. Maybe we will be as we watch, as we learn of him. Give me a drink. It says in verse 8, his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. I already told you that, didn't I? They went into the city to go buy some groceries. Now, I just cannot imagine Jesus being paralyzed without his disciples. I can't imagine Jesus like, would you guys go into the store and get me stuff? Because I just don't see him like, Lord Crawley at Downton Abbey, just like, without my valet, how am I going to put on my fancy pants? How am I going to get dressed? I need someone to, I don't see Jesus just sitting there on his hands saying, oh, my disciples are gone. I can't get any water. Oh, good thing this woman came along. She can help me. I see it like so many things. Here, everywhere. It's an opportunity. The guys are gone. Good. They won't understand anyway. It's an opportunity for Jesus to have this time one-on-one with her and to present an openness and a need that she can now interact and get this dialogue going. And that's one of the incredible things about John's gospel. That's why I was excited to come to this after we left Luke. I wanted to move forward. I've been teaching through the Bible for, 41 years. I don't know how much longer I have. This may be my last day. You never know. Coronavirus is out there. Who knows? More danger on the highway. But man, there's no place I would rather be than in John's gospel. And in John chapter 4. This is the gospel that begins with, in the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. All of this heights so far over our head, and yet chapter after chapter, there's these one-on-one dialogues of Jesus with people. Nicodemus, far to the right in chapter 3, now with this woman far to the left. Later on in chapter 8, with a woman caught in the act of adultery, brought to Jesus in his time with her. Wasn't alone at first, but after the statement about throw the first stone thing, then pretty soon it was just Jesus and her alone. And that was probably the best time. Chapter 9, man born blind, he gets kicked out of the synagogue. Oh, darn, I've been kicked out by the religious leaders. Jesus finds the man and spends time with him one-on-one. These different pictures, the disciples went to the grocery store. Good for them. That's an opportunity too. You never know who you'll meet there. But Jesus knows he meets this woman, and it's good. It's good that they're alone. And it says in verse 9, the Samaritan woman therefore said to him, how is it that you, being a Jew, ask me for a drink since I'm a Samaritan woman? For the Jews have no dealings with the Samaritans. She's struck immediately with what I'm often struck with. Jesus is so different. He's so different than the other religious people. He approaches people in such a different way. The Samaritans, to this day, are still in that strange situation. And again, you can look it up online. There are only about 800 living in the land of Israel. People who are still Samaritans. They still have all of their traditional approaches. They, in many ways, are very much like the Jews, but the Jews see them as Samaritans. The Arabs don't see them as Jews. The Christians don't. They're in this place where it's peculiar. It's perilous. There's about 400 living in a suburb of Tel Aviv and about 400 living still there at Mount Gerizim, at this place where they feel like that is, forget this whole thing about Jerusalem, the temple. This is the Holy Land. And you know what? They have all of their scriptures and all of their traditions and all of their, if you're brought up in that, if this is your family for hundreds and hundreds of years, those who are loyal and who love their family, they still love the land. They still love that position, and they're still hated. And during some of the intifadas and the uprisings, when they had lived down below in Nablus, then they were persecuted there, and so for safety, they went up higher on Gerizim, and then of course the Jews have planted a settlement up in that area as well. And the interesting thing is that some of the Samaritans, the 400 living still in that region, they see themselves as potential peacemakers. Because a lot of them have a vote. They can vote in the Palestinian Authority. They can also vote in Israel. And no one it's kind of like, which party are you part of? No one's going to like you. Half the people won't like you if you say anyway. But they see themselves as, you know what, rather than everyone hates us, maybe we can be a bridge between people who hate each other even more than they hate us. And so, I don't know, I found it really refreshing to just read some articles and hear some interviews with living, breathing people who are still in that same sort of situation. And the interesting thing nowadays for them is that the woman at the well thing is like a real shortage. They don't have enough women at the well. They've run low on Samaritan women. It's a lot of women, especially that once they get more and more familiar with freedoms and Western ways, they don't want to be a Samaritan woman and live according to that culture. So not having a well, they have the World Wide Web, or at least not a well that works like this one does. They're going to Ukraine, and they're bringing in all these Ukrainian brides who are more than happy to become Samaritans because Russia stole Crimea from them anyway. And do you care about all this? I find all this stuff fascinating. How the world today intertwines and interworks, and you got these Ukrainian gals coming over just more than happy to be a Samaritan woman. And these families who love each other, and they're not that different from us. Jesus knows that. These are people who just want love and family and friendship, and I don't want to get shot at. I don't want to shoot you. I don't want to get shot at. How can we live in peace? How can we find a way that works? It still goes on to this day. And Jesus was always so far ahead of his time because Jesus is timeless. In Christ, there's neither male nor female, Jew or Gentile, barbarian, Scythian, slave or free. All these social divides, all these things that we make so much of. Differences, to be sure, but not differences that are supposed to make you choke up and cough and die. not differences that are supposed to make divisions. We do that. But in Christ, it's just not that way. One more time. So here he is, meeting with this woman. We need more meetings like this. Religious meetings. With the coronavirus, if ever we do get a really highly contagious thing, there may be times when the government will say, close down the schools, and it's not good for you to meet in church. In a church like this, it doesn't matter because we don't sit next to each other anyway. But stuff like that, and I can already see the headlines, government persecution, all of this sort of stuff. I think a lot of religious meetings, we'd probably be better off if they just shut them down. These are the kind of meetings we need. People talking to people. People loving people like Jesus did. And so here he is meeting with her. Even though Jews don't have dealings with Samaritans, Jesus answered and said to her, if you knew the gift of God and who it is who says to you, give me a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water. He says, if you'd known who you're talking to, if you'd known the gift of God, not a gift from God, not one of the things that he hands out, the gift of God himself. If you knew God, if you knew the one who's talking to you. The water he speaks of is not some sensory thing that like, ooh, a religious buzz. Wow, I got this river of life flowing out of me. I had it when I went on the altar call. I got it back at the last revival we had. That's the thing. Anything that touches your senses will eventually fade, because that's the way our senses are designed. Anything that's just limited to the feelings of the body is going to fade because our bodies themselves fade. What Jesus offers here in this whole story about the water, and we'll talk about it more, and hopefully we'll learn about it the rest of our lives, he's talking about not a gift from God, but the gift of God himself. God is love. And if you knew that love, if you received that sort of love, it's something that'll never run dry. It's something you'll never drink up. It's something you'll never run out of. It's height, depth, length, and breadth beyond imagining. If you knew that love, you would find what you've never found in any of the relationships in all the world where you keep trying to connect with people. You'd find something sustaining and something fulfilling in someone who loves you incredibly. And that's what's being offered. Not just something that stimulates the senses. Oh, I got that special water thing. It's the love of God that sometimes we can't feel. Sometimes we can't sense it. Sometimes we're overwhelmed with depression. But the love of God never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. We may not be aware, but he is. There's one thing more essential than water to our body. It's the love of God in regard to our soul and our heart. And God knows that. And it can't be conditional. It can't be based upon, are you a good boy or a good girl today? It's got to be something that says, you know what, I love you no matter what. And I'll do whatever it takes to not lose you. You matter to me. I'll wear myself out to the point of sweating blood, to the point of the cross. I love you that much. You matter that much to me. I care for you. Something more essential than water for our body is the love of God for our soul. The 1 Corinthians 13 sort of love. The love that says if it's not there, whatever else you do is nothing. But the love that says if it is there, hey, you're learning. That's what life's all about. She didn't know. At this point, he says, if you knew the gift of God and who it is who says to you, give me a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water. It's not like, okay, but since you don't know, time's up. I'm going to give you about 60 more seconds like I did with Nicodemus. You must be born again. And then game's off, game over, I'm moving on. No, he's simply saying there is someone here talking to you. There is something being offered that once you know and once you start wanting it, because again, he goes where he's most welcomed and wanted. If you want the love of God you've got. He cares for you. And you get to know. She doesn't know right then. As in the course of this dialogue, we'll see she learns, and she'll keep on learning. And I believe I'm learning. I hope you're learning. That's the one thing I would like to teach each of you. God loves you. He cares for you, not because you're the biggest congregation in town, not because you gave a lot of money at the offering, not because you did whatever religious deeds you think are the thing to do. He cares for you because you're you. It doesn't matter if you're Mr. Righty Right over on the right or Mr. Far or Mrs. Far out left over to the left. His love is big enough to embrace all. Doesn't mean that people don't need to change. We all need to change. We need to begin again. We need to be born of the Spirit. But the love of God is what we learn. That's why we're here. Whatever other accomplishment we have, again, go back to 1 Corinthians 13. If it's without love, it's absolutely nothing. but to learn love, to learn how you are loved, and to learn how to love as you have been loved. That's the journey of life. Every day, wherever you go, to the grocery store, Trader Joe's, Costco, at the well, wherever, to learn how you're loved, to learn how to love. This is a place with a lot of problems. It's a place with a lot of threats, a place with a lot of worries and fears. There's all kinds of ways to circle the wagon and act out our tribal instincts. We can let fear drive us, and it'll drive us crazy. Fear hath torment. But perfect love casts out all fear. And here's perfect love talking to this woman there at the well. And the good news is he's with us still right here, right now. Let's turn to him.
God, you're our refuge and strength, a very present help in time of need. Therefore our hearts will not fear, though the world all around us should change. God, you're our refuge and strength, a very present help in time of need. Therefore our hearts will not fear, though the world all around us should change. God is in our midst, we shall not be moved. God will help us through the night till morning dawns. God is in our midst, we shall not be moved. God will help us through the night till morning dawns. God is in our midst, we shall not be moved. God will help us through the night till morning comes again. He's coming again. God, you're our refuge and strength, a very present help in time of need. Therefore our hearts will not fear, though the world all around us should change. God, you're in our midst, we shall not be moved. God, you'll help us through the night till morning dawns. God, you're in our midst, we shall not be moved. God, you'll help us through the night till morning dawns. God, you're in our midst, we shall not be moved.